QSO Today, Episode 376, Michael Johnson, WO9B. My thanks to Icom America for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth for Z1UG. That's my amateur call sign, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. Michael Johnson, WO9B's ham radio career, has evolved through a number of phases over the last 50 years that now include CW and QRP operation with his dog during CWOPs weekly tests from local parks in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Mike's park operation has become a weekly meetup for his local ham radio club. WO9B enjoys DMR and HF digital modes as well and is my QSO today. WO9B, this is Eric for Z1UG. Are you there, Mike?
Hi, Eric. How are you?
I'm good, Mike. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Wow. I knew you were going to ask that question, and I've been stumbling along because I didn't keep any crib notes or log books from back in the day. I started as a junior high schooler. I'm thinking 8th, maybe 9th grade. It was about 1972, and I just started. And when I say that, I knew virtually no one in the hobby. I didn't have an Elmer. I didn't have one of those epiphany situations where I had visited someplace and became enamored of the hobby. None of the above. And I just locked onto the hobby in some odd fashion. I couldn't tell you how. And went in those days. I became a novice and did it by finding someone who would give me a test. And virtually anybody could give tests back in those days. I think a general or an advanced could. And so I sat and took a test and nervously did my 4 weeks waiting for the FCC to catch up with what I knew to be eventual reality. Did you get your sample QSL cards from the little print shop before to find out what your call sign was? I did not. It was a strange novice thing for me. It was one of those weird deals where my parents had zero input and zero assistance. So I carved out a desk next to the furnace in the basement, which is an odd place, but it had the benefit of being next to or near a window that I could snake a coax cable out of. Keep in mind, I had no Elmer, so I didn't know what I should be doing or shouldn't be doing.
What was the hometown, Mike?
Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Did you have an interest in electricity or electronics even before this idea took hold?
No, none. I was unaware of radio clubs. I just didn't have anything. But going back to your original question about the QSO card, the one input was my mom was an artist, and she actually made me a QSL card. It looked like a state of Minnesota license plate at the time.
What was your first call sign?
WN0IPW, which became WB0IPW.
When you upgraded to general?
Yes, that was fun. That was an adventure.
The adventure of being a novice? Or the adventure of getting the license?
The adventure of getting the license. I lived in Minneapolis, and again, keeping with back in those days, my parents had zero interest in assisting me, and it wasn't cruel on their part. I think it was intentional, by the way. But to take the general class, all of a sudden I needed to go actually to the FCC, which fortunately had an office located in St. Paul, Minnesota, but I couldn't drive. I was too young to drive. And so I ended up, literally taking a bus to the FCC and all by myself. And it was completely the terrorizing event that everybody talks about back in the day. I was hard shares and unfriendly place. And I don't remember anybody talking to me at all.
Gray government steel desks.
oh God, the whole 9 yards. It was right out of a movie set. And but it worked out. I ended up passing. I guess the thing was pass to failure was the or test to failure was the modus to take the test. So I walked out with a general and a failed advanced class, and I passed my 13 words per minute and whatnot. But I think to go backwards a couple steps, my single biggest memory was learning the Morse code, and I did it with a record, and I don't think that was unusual in the day.
No, I did it the same way.
And I sat in front of the stereo, which is a big cabinet stereo, as I recall, for weeks and weeks, and playing those dits and das. And I can only imagine my family hated me.
Or do you have siblings?
I had one brother, yeah, just one brother. He was not a ham and couldn't have cared less. For his position, I was taking up his time on the stereo.
And were you using a Miko Morse code course or something like that?
Yeah, it was something. It was a long play. It was a record, and I went from one end to the other on the record, and that got me into 5 word per minute country. And then after that, it was on the air business with the world's worst station. And
what was the station? Your novice station?
I knew you were going to ask that question. I have been dragging my memory trying to figure out what it was. There was a tried and true ham radio shop located in downtown Minneapolis, and was then and probably still now is, quote, the warehouse district. And it was, it was suitably, misfit and downtrodden and dusty. And I cannot think of the name of it. And I bought my first gear used from them, and I recall them having shelves of used gear at the time. I had never heard of a ham fest or a swap fest or anything like that. And I think I walked out with some sort of Hammerland radio receiver. Couldn't tell you what the transmitter was. It certainly was crystal controlled. And the receiver, if I made 3 contacts with that setup, I'd be surprised. It was god awful.
You didn't really use your novice experience as on the air time. You spent most of your time with the books and the record.
No, the problem with the novice days was trying to make a contact, and I had an abysmal vertical antenna in my backyard with no verticals. It had a manual. It was whatever the high gain version is with the tuning coil at the bottom with the air coil, and that was my novice station, and actually that was also my general station. I never really improved my lie. Coming out of my days in the basement in Minneapolis, it was a tough existence, and I remember finally giving up on the Hammerland gear and getting a Heathkit crystal controlled something or other, and then I actually started to make contacts, and frankly that was a lot of fun. The crystal controlled days were certainly a challenge, and I kind of laugh now when I do CW now. It's 250 kilohertz bandwidth. Well, that would have netted 0 QSOs back in the day. You needed to be able to tune 10 KCs up and down to find out who might be answering your CQs.
Do you think that was a transceiver, crystal controlled transceiver?
Absolutely.
So that might have been the HW16, perhaps.
I think that sounds very familiar. Yeah, sounds about right.
That was a great novice transceiver at the time. I had one of those as well. This interest in amateur radio, did it lead to further study?
Well, it was kind of funky. As I said, I didn't really have any Elmers, but I had there was one huge positive that was really, really strange, and that was my high school actually had a ham radio station with and I mean, it was really a nice station. And it had a 6-element beam up on the roof, a high-gain TH6DXX, as I recall. And it was all kind of put together by the electronics teacher who had a tech license, and because he couldn't get past 5 words per minute. And nobody used the station. There was no ham club. And I ended up taking an electronics course and spent the entire class. The teacher was thrilled that there was actually somebody with a license. I spent the entire class, in the ham radio room. I built my 12 volt or my 1.5 volt battery project, and that took 10 minutes. And then for the next 45 minutes, I was, in the ham radio shack playing with their gear as best I could, and which was after I'd become a general. So I was. And that was it. That was my entire ham radio life in what I refer to as my first ham radio evolution, and that ultimately, which died the day I started college.
The interest in ham radio and the electronics background?
Yeah, exactly. I ended up going to the college I went to. And I went in as a civil engineer. I'm a structural engineer by training, so no electronics whatsoever. When I started college, I had shed my ham radio credentials and interests, and did all the things that college students do in 1976. And ham radio was not part of that program, not at all. Although I did stop by. At one point, the college did have a ham radio club, and I actually tracked it down. It was in some dusty corner on an upper floor in the engineering building, and I don't even think they locked the door. There was so nothing in there. It was a non-starter, and my ham radio career in college lasted about 20 minutes as I closed the door on the ham radio shack and left the room.
What was the school that you went to?
Marquette University in Milwaukee.
You became a civil engineer. You got your BSCE?
Yes, I did. I got a BSCE, and I was a structural engineer and never practiced a single day. I immediately went into construction management and general contracting, commercial, and never looked back.
Did you join a family business, or did you decide that you just wanted to be a general contractor?
I had very little interest in sitting in a cubicle and designing structures. And the college experience was one where they had at that time was a unique program and is no longer unique. They had a co-op program, which would be today called an internship program. And I hooked on with a general contractor, a design build general contractor, rather large firm who happened to be out of Minneapolis. And I just became enamored of the project management world. It was fun. It was exciting. I got to be in charge of building buildings and structures and interior build outs and all the complexities, and I just loved that world. It was filled with characters and challenges, and you'd go from boom to bust in no time flat.
It was like riding the horse, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, that was my life, and I worked for several general contractors over the year, owned my own firm, and et cetera, and eventually I just in the last 4 or 5 years I've just eked my way out of that business. It's as lawyers are fond of saying, courtroom work is a young man's game. Well, at some point, general contracting is a young man's game. So you just tire of the brutality of it at some point.
So, are you retired now?
Pretty much so. Yeah.
When did ham radio come back into your life?
The second evolution of ham radio started oddly. I had taken a new job. And I had been living in Minneapolis for several years, since college, frankly, and I had taken a new job that offered an opportunity to start up a firm in the Milwaukee market area, which my wife is from Milwaukee, and I'd done my time here in college and whatnot, so that was kind of a familiar transfer, and so I took that opportunity and came to Milwaukee and. I would say within a year or two, that had to be about 1987 or so. And within a year or two of that, I somehow got the bug again to see what was going on in ham radio. I think I got tired of I actually had moved my ham radio gear, whatever was left of it that my parents had made me, take with me. And anyway, so I said, well, maybe I'll set it up and see what's happening. And that kind of began my second evolution of amateur radio. And that's the part where I discovered that there were other hams and there were things like field day. I'd never heard of field day. So here I'd been a ham for, I don't know, 15, almost 20 years, and I'd never even heard of field day. So
you never joined the ARRL? You never got the magazines or anything like that?
Oh, I did. I did back in the early 70s, but it I had no technical background and nobody told me what's important. So it was just this magazine with a bunch of cool ads and stories that I didn't understand. And I'd stare at these circuit diagrams and they didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And so I'd skip past that and get to the important stuff, which is the final 50 pages of ads.
Did you ever lose the license or you just kept renewing it?
I kept renewing it. I was keenly aware that I had no interest in taking the tests again, particularly after having the FCC. My best day would be to never go back to the FCC again, and so I was highly motivated on that regard to keep my license alive and well.
And now this message from Icom America. Spice up your ham shack with Icom's IC705. This portable radio is perfect for staying in and venturing out and working your favorite bands this winter season. Happy holidays from Icom. The Icom IC705 is the perfect sidekick and QRP companion. Base station features and functionality at the tip of your fingertips in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. This compact rig weighs in at just over 2 pounds, with RF direct sampling for most of the HF band and IF sampling for frequencies above 25 megahertz. It has a 4.3-inch touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall display, 5 watts with a BP272, 10 watts with the 13.8 volts DC power supply, single sideband CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functionality. A touchscreen display, micro USB connector, Bluetooth, and wireless LAN, integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger, micro SD card slot, speaker microphone using the HM243, and it comes standard. It supports QRP and QRPP operations. The perfect accessory for the IC705 is the optional LC192 backpack with its special compartment for your IC705 and room for accessories for SOTA activations or a day out in the wild. Our family of favorite Icom amateur radios are also available this holiday season. The IC9700, the IC9300, the IC7610 base stations, the ID52A handheld coming soon, and the ID5100A mobile are the perfect gifts, and it's the most wonderful time of the year to give a gift of Icom. For more information, click on the Icom banner in this week's show notes page, and when you purchase your new Icom rig, please tell your dealer that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. Did you become a member of the amateur radio community in Milwaukee once you decided to come back?
I eked my way in, and I won't say I jumped in with full force, but what I did do was somehow I figured out I was smart enough to pick up a VHF radio, a little Kenwood HT, and that got me onto the local repeater scene, and that ultimately meant. And I was particularly interested in the local repeaters because they, at the time, two things didn't exist, and that was cell phones and the internet. And but with a HT, you could, on a 2-meter repeater, you could make auto patch calls, and I was like, wow, that's cool. So that's what got me interested in the VHF world, and that led to meeting. I've eventually met some people, and so as you do on repeaters, so you become a familiar voice. People go from being just a voice on the air to being 3D at some point, and so that's how that worked out. And I remember, for some reason, I was on my VHF radio on some late Saturday night in June, and I heard Steve. Steve was on the radio. He said, "Hey, Mike, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I don't know. I'm going to the store. I'm picking up a 6-pack of beer or a 12-pack of beer or something, whatever. I got nothing else going on." He says, "Well, come on up. We're having field day." And I said, "What's field day?" It seems so silly looking back on that. And I said, "Well, can I bring beer?" He goes, he said, "I think it's required." So I went to my very first field day, and there they were on the top of a ski hill in Milwaukee, and man, it was really, really cool. There was a bunch of hams there, and and one thing just led to another. I made some CW contacts with my rusty CW skills, and I frankly walked out of field day with a bunch of new friends, and that was kind of the beginning of that evolution. So it was, is serendipitous to some degree, yeah.
Then what happened after that? Did you upgrade the rig, with their help? Did you ask for help? Did the community kind of help you get yourself even more entrenched?
Yeah, as it turns out, the guys I fell in with all worked for a local commercial radio shop, and quite well known, and they were all good guys, and it turns out that there's a sphere of hams that all hung around there. So that was the place to get to start to know people and find a way into the Milwaukee community. And I should say it was very active. One thing led to another. They became quite taken with my story of they couldn't believe that I'd never heard of field day or done anything ham radio wise. And so, that began that Elmering process, so to speak. And, it led to, participation in not just field days, but various contests. And, at some point, certainly not me, but the group put up a repeater, and I was, hanging out on that repeater all the time, and just a really good operating situation. It was all super healthy. I did packet radio and, introduced my Commodore 64 into the game. And that's what I would tell you. I became a real ham and actually put a what we refer to as a roof tower, which is a 10-foot tripod on my roof with a 3-element beam. And man, I was living large with a 300-watt AL84 amplifier.
What's the current rig?
My current rig's a Yaesu FT891.
And what's your favorite operating mode?
CW.
Really?
Yeah, that's pretty much that. If I have a choice, I'll always be doing CW. I just have an affinity for it.
Why CW, do you think, from a philosophical standpoint?
I think I gravitate to what I grew up on. And given my meager ham radio technology when I first got in the hobby, if I didn't do CW, I didn't talk to anybody. It wasn't possible to make contacts outside of my neighborhood with anything but CW back when I was a novice. And so I became good at CW, and it just has stuck with me. And I dearly love CW a lot. That's my mode of choice.
Now, it's my understanding from doing a little bit of research that you also like QRP.
I do. And as a matter of fact, I'm not a collector of ham radio gear, so I'm in that group that if you buy something new, something old's got to go. And so right now, my entire station sits on the corner of my desk, and it consists of little boxes. So it's an 891 on top of a little automatic tuner, and on top of that is a VHF UHF rig. That's my entire ham radio gear. I just do not collect a lot. I'm amazed with what can be accomplished by plugging all that stuff into a computer. And I have literally a 130-foot dipole ladder line fed doublet, if you will, and that's my entire radio station.
The antenna tuner is a balance tuner, so you're running that balance line out of the back of it, or do you go through the wall and go to some kind of balun or something like that to balance the line?
Yeah, it's a standard little LDG tuner, and it runs a hunk of coax outside to a 4-to-1 Guanella balance.
And then balance line up to the antenna.
Correct.
Yeah, amazing.
It's highly versatile. It gets me on 160 through 10 meters. Last summer I put together. I was determined to participate in the VHF season, and so I put together a Squalo antenna, and so there is a Squalo hanging up on the roof somewhere that I took from the local Home Depot and converted it into a project. And what a nice little antenna that is. It's super simple.
What is a Squalo antenna? I've never heard of that.
Really, it's just a 6-meter loop. It's a square version of a halo antenna, ergo Squalo. So
right, so it's horizontally polarized. It's in the horizontal plane.
Correct. It's a unity antenna, so you're not getting much gain. But I initially put it on a 12-foot piece of PVC in my backyard, and ultimately I moved it up to my roof. And it's just great. It works out just fine. It's not going to win me any awards, but it certainly gets me on 6 meters. And for the most part, 6 meters tends to be FT8 work these days. So what do you really need?
Are you doing FT8?
Yes, of course. Oh, yes. Oh, anything you can plug in, plugging in the computer into the back end. I was just joking with someone the last week or two that I've got an FT, with my 891, there isn't a spare hole on the back of it that doesn't have a plug into it.
Now, it's my understanding that you also like to operate portable.
Yes.
And how do you do that?
I became enamored of portable operations with, if you will, the ARRL's Napoda, National Parks on the Air event. That must be 5 or 6 years ago now. Really struck a chord with me. That if they had a genius moment, that was it for them. It's hard to catch lightning in a bottle more than once, and they certainly did that time. That struck my imagination and literally thousands of others, and in a very lasting way. So what for portable operations now, CW is my mode of choice, and I have been running around Milwaukee with a little wire antenna, a little end-fed half-wave antenna, and frankly, my current radio is an LNR mountain topper, a lovely radio, and boy oh boy, it's just great. You can literally talk around the world with it. So I've made contacts to Europe more regularly, though. It's unlimited talk on 40 and 20 throughout the United States, no problem.
Is that the model like SW3B?
The SW3B was my previous one. That's a great little radio. Weird how I stumbled on that. I had initially bought my 891 with the concept being that I would take that portable with me. And it just proved to be too much of a hassle to keep disconnecting it from my home situation and taking it with me every week. And so I grew tired of that right away. And so I had at one point picked up a UKITS HB1B, I believe, or HB4B, something like that. H14B, I think it was. And I love that radio. It was great. But again, in my philosophy of when you buy something new, something old's got to go, I sold that to when I bought the 891 because I was tired of the QRP and I wanted to go portable QRO, which is 100 watts. But that became burdensome because of the disconnects and whatnot. So I said, I've got to find myself a new radio. And I had determined that I was going to buy and build a QCX radio. So I did. I bought one. I bought a kit. I believe it was the 40 meter QCX kit. And I got this thing. And by hook or by crook, it came, like on Christmas Eve a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago. And I couldn't believe my luck and good time. It was a perfect Christmas present for me. And I opened this thing up and out fell all these parts. And I'm like, oh my God, and I just stared at it, and I realized I have no tools to put this thing together, and it became evident that I needed a better strategy than just distributing the parts on my workbench and saying go, because I had previously, by the way, built an amplifier kit, which I dearly loved. So I was enthused that I could do it until I saw the size of the parts. I'm like, ooh. So I kind of sat on that for about a month. And I stumbled on someplace, probably, QRZ or QRZ Today or Now or something. And this SW3B popped out. And I looked at it, and it was, I don't know, something short of $200. I'm like, it's got the bands I need. It's already built. I'm going to do it. So I literally bought that. And then I sold again in new, out, old. I sold the QCX online, took about an hour on QRZ. And I got that SW3B. And what a grand little radio that turned out to be. It was absolutely thrilled. And then just this past summer, or spring, I should say, I was in a park activating, and my usual Wednesday thing, and it broke. It just, something went awry, and I'm like, oh dear, here comes the case of the Chinese radios living up to their whatever, and so it broke, and I was like, oh, I was kind of bummed, and I posted on their Facebook group, and then I decided, they were very helpful, by the way, but sympathetic, empathetic, but, couldn't really help. And I then sent an email to the guy who I had bought it from, some fella out of China. And I have to tell you, I received a response from him in about 20 minutes. I was blown away. And he said, oh, it sounds like it might be this. Can you send me a video? I sent him a video. 20 minutes later, I get another email back from him. I'm getting customer support from a Chinese manufacturer that frankly blew me away. It's better than any customer support I'd ever received on any of my other ham radio gear. And I'm just totally blown away. This guy, I ended up sending him the radio. I took a deep breath, paid the U.S. Postal Service $28 and sent my radio, back home, if you will, with zero expectation that I'd ever see it again, and no sense of timing, particularly because of the COVID situation and the vagaries of the transportation lines. And so I'm saying, wow, this radio could be gone for, I don't know, a month, 2 months, who knows? Maybe I'll never get it back. So at that point, I stood in line at the LNR beggar booth and bought a Mountain Topper 4-band version 2 and paid more money than I thought I should. I had to wait like 2 or 3 weeks for it. But man, oh man, when I got that radio, that is quite a radio. And I just never looked back. The long and story short was I ended up getting the SW3B back, and it worked perfectly. It took, total time was, 6 or 7 weeks. Zero charge. This radio was at least, 6 months out of warranty. And I got it back, no charge, and it worked perfectly. And of course, I sold it because I now had a new radio. So out goes the old.
It sounds to me like with customer service like that I will put a link to it in the show notes pages for people who might want to have the same customer experience.
Yeah. It was very good. I couldn't believe how well that SW3B was. It was great radio.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA30N, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO. Now, what did you like about working in the parks? Did you do national parks and actually go to national parks, or were you like a chaser?
I really didn't care much about chasing. I chased quite a bit, but only because it was a lot of fun to do. But we would actually go and do activations within Wisconsin. There's a limited array of places. One of the fellows in our club, our ham club, got very much involved in it and had some real legitimate adventures. And I did not. But what came out of it for me was the portable operations. And so what I started doing with the ham club was it started, 3 or 4 years ago, and we would do, 2 or 3 operations a summer with the ham club, and we just go pick a park, any park, and we just meet up there, and it was a lot of fun, and maybe a dozen people would show up, which would be great, a great response, but that got old quickly because it was on a random day, and in the middle of the afternoon in the summer, it's with a dozen people and maybe 3 radios that get set up, and without much of a quote strategy, people aren't exactly beating a path to you. So people would walk away at the end of the event with 2 contacts or maybe no contacts and whatnot, and so that kind of petered out on its own. But I wasn't willing to give up on that yet, and somewhere along the way, I had. The CWOPs people had outreach to me and said, "Hey, do you want to join us? Because we see that you qualify. You've been hanging out in CWOPs or CWTs rather." And I was always flummoxed by that organization because I never knew how to get sponsored. And well, of course, the answer to getting sponsored is show up for their CWTs, and sooner or later you're going to get the magic email. So anyway, I joined CWOPs, and I love those CWTs. But the Wednesdays, CWT at 1900 falls at 2 p.m. Milwaukee time. And I'm saying to myself, well, there you go. Now we have rhyme and reason to go out in the parks. And so I began about 3 years ago doing CWTs on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. because I knew if I showed up in the park with my QRP radio, there would be a target-rich environment for me to participate in, and I would certainly be making contacts from coast to coast. And that's what I did. And so every Wednesday I'd go to a different park or try to go to a different park. And I let the club know what I was up to. And the first year it was me, myself, and I, and my dog. We had a lovely summer going from park to park to park. And I became enamored of portable operations. And the quicker I could get set up, the better. And it is true. Practice makes perfect. And in the crucible of working a CWT, if you're going to do a dozen operations in the summer, you're gonna hone your or boil away your the excess fat, so to speak. So I got really, really good at putting little radios together with quick set antennas and that operate really well. There you go.
In episode 245, I interviewed the late Joe Everhart, N2CX, and he was also big at operating in parks. And one of the things I took away from his conversation was oftentimes in these parks, they don't allow you to throw wires through the trees or whatever. And so he kind of came up with this way to operate from his car so that the antenna mast and everything became part of the car so that he kept his footprint contained. What kind of antennas do you use in parks in order to maybe have low impact or no impact?
I have used several types of antennas. The first one I used was the Wolf River Coil vertical antenna, and that has virtually no impact. But it's setup intensive. It really is. I had fooled with utilizing the fiberglass poles. And that doesn't always work out because there's not always a good correlation between the parking lot and your operating position. So that was bad for me. In Wisconsin, and in particularly in Milwaukee area, there is no prohibition on utilizing the multitude of trees. So basically my NFED program now is I do use the tree. And what I do is I throw I attach a golf ball to the end of my end-fed wire, and I, David and Goliath fashion, sling it up into the tree, and the golf ball will usually go over a branch of some kind and offers just enough pull-out resistance when matched with a 26 gauge chunk of wire that it'll stay up there, and yet it's retrievable virtually all the time with just a tug. So that's my low impact. That is not. You're quite correct. That is not suitable for every QTH, however. It works here, but your mileage may vary depending on where you go and what the local rules and of operations are.
What is the spark plug? Is that your product?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, because I was seeing that online, and then I also saw your website that said, and we'll talk a little bit about your presentation or your co-presentation that you made at the expo in August. But talk about the spark plug. What is that?
The spark plug is a 64-to-1 end-fed impedance transformer. Is really all it is. It's I jokingly say it's technology that any ham from the 1930s would recognize, and it is. But it's packaged a little differently. In my quest to make if you will, my portable operation crucible, I ended up with end-fed antennas, and I started making a bunch of them. And traditionally, there's nothing fancy about it. You grab yourself in my case, a Type 43 toroid, and wind some magnet wire around it, and there you go. Add a capacitor and and a BNC connector, and that's an antenna. And they work great, and usually they're packaged in little plastic boxes. And the problem I had was with the number of portable ops I did, those plastic boxes would get fairly beat up and fairly quickly. It also became apparent to me that there is absolutely no rhyme or reason to have a plastic box if it's beat up, cracked, and non-supportive. What's it doing? So I was listening to a couple of guys jibber jabber, and one guy said, "Yeah, I had an end-fed antenna, and the plastic box cracked, so I took it away. Now I just put some strain relief on it, and who needs the plastic box?" So he's got these naked coils up there. So I got to thinking, well, maybe there's a better way to do it. There's a station. There's a California station. I'm going to say it's W6ARK, and I may have that call sign incorrect. And I had seen a YouTube by Mike. I think it's KD8 something or other. And I shame on me for not being able to recall it, but he has a nice YouTube channel and does portable park operations out of Michigan all the time. And he's a colorful personality, and he had this little transformer. It was a QRP transformer, and it literally was the size of a button. And he had, at some point, and he had said, "I got this from his friend," and I looked at it and I said, "Wow, that's a great idea." And so then I started thinking about what I could do to make a transformer, work for my situation better. I went through several iterations of transformers, and they work great. They all work great because it's not new technology in any way, shape, or form. But they suffered failures in that connectors would break or something. So I didn't quite have the practical means of operating or having the thing work out. So boom, I stumbled on the what I call the spark plug, which has it looks like a spark plug. It looks like the spark plug that I took out of my lawnmower and cleaned. And on the base of it is the toroid, and the part that has that has the spark, and the threaded end is the BNC connector. And to that I've got a little plastic end that it happens to be white because it looks like a spark plug, and a brass screw and knurled knob on the end, and that's the spark plug. And it's wonderfully portable and wonderful. You can abuse the heck out of it, and it just keeps on ticking.
Okay, well, I'll put a link to that, but the way that you use it, how much end-fed wire do you put on the end of the spark plug? And is the counterpoise the coax going from the B and C connector back to the rig?
Yeah, very much so. It's a true end-fed half wave and underscore half wave. So I'm utilizing half wave lengths of wire. My typical deployment is a 40 meter half wave, so it's approximately 67 feet long. That way it becomes totally resonant. It's resonant on both 40/20 and 15, and 15 is kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. It's mostly resonant on 15, if you will. It starts to get a little inductive as those antennas do 15 and 10 meters, but there you go. No worries, because my primary usage is 40 and 20, and it's a wonderful antenna on 40 and 20, and doesn't require a tuner. Again, part of that crucible of getting things down to a minimum, I didn't want to have a tuner. The LNR radio and certainly the SW3B does not have a tuner, so being resonant is critical for those operations, and that's basically what I do, and so it's very simple. It winds up on a little hand carryable winder, and I feed it with typically 25 feet of RG174 coax, and indeed the coax does operate as the counterboy. Again, from a simplicity standpoint, that's my main goal. I want to be able to get to the park and have a running station in 5 minutes, and that's easily accomplished with that setup.
We will return to our guests in just a moment. A new way to show your support of the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee. I consume gallons of coffee to create this weekly podcast. Invite me for coffee by pushing the yellow button, Buy Me a Coffee, on the QSO Today show notes page. And now back to our QSO Today. And what other must-haves do you have out there in the park? I understand you've got the rig, you've got the antenna, you throw the golf ball over the tree, you've got everything up. For the uninitiated who might want to work in the park, me, for example, what is the thing that most people forget to take to the park that they should take, now that you're an expert?
You need a logbook of some kind. So bring along pad and paper. That's easy. But the only other thing you need is a battery or power source of some kind. And again, I see oftentimes people will put these Go kits on the on their Facebook page or whatnot, and they're huge. I mean, by comparison, they're just huge.
They're 80 pounds. It's a two-man carry.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to understand, to me, even a Bio-NO 20 amp battery is way, way, way too big. So I actually crafted my own lithium iron phosphate a 1.1 amp hour battery. So that's very small. But the magic of lithium iron phosphate is the voltage range is ideal for ham radio. It's exactly what the radios are looking for, and the battery, the discharge curve is exactly what you as a ham are looking for. And if it's a 1.1 amp hour battery, it's got a usable. There's 1 amp hour of usable juice out of it, and if I match that with a little QRP CW rig, that literally translates to 3 months of radio time between charges. So it's really, really nice. I mean, the LNR radios or those little QRP radios, they have a key down voltage or key down amp draw of usually around 700 milliamps. So if I somehow miraculously left the key down for an hour, I would still have battery left. They're phenomenal. Just absolute power sippers, and not what else should you bring? Bring along a spare something or other. My failure modes in the radio are I'll break my coax or I'll break my antenna wire. So bring a spare along, and if you're dealing with 67 feet of 26 gauge wire, that's nothing. I mean, that's like 1 ounce of weight, and it's if you're using RG174 coax, that's like 2 ounces of coax. So
I'm always thinking, for me, that I would like to operate in the park. Maybe I'd even attract some attention and sell ham radio. But I'm also thinking, like a chair, a hat, an umbrella, or something. If you're out in the sun, whether you're going to wilt or not out in the sun, water. I mean, do you carry any of those other kind of supplies with you?
Well, I always bring water along, and I always bring my dog along because those ham radio and the dog just seems to go great together. And his patience is astounding. I choose my parks. The current series of parks that I've been going to, typically I try to find one with shelters and ones that have picnic tables, so I don't have to bring the rest of that stuff.
Great idea.
Yeah, why not use what's been provided is kind of, and this, in the last year, I've gone from being a solo operation to now I publish what park I'm going to every Monday, and shame on me, that's today, so I've got to pick one out. Although we're getting kind of dicey weather-wise here in the Milwaukee area, but we will have anywhere from 3 to 12 people show up every Wednesday now. And it's turned into not just social hour, but people are playing with different types of antennas. People are experimenting with different radio setups. They're in process of fine tuning their gear. During the summer months, one local ham brought his kids along, and they would always set up an FT8 operation. It's turned into a lot of fun, and people, it's turned into social hour. It really has, and it's really nice from the standpoint that it's an hour. So people you tell them where you're going, and people show up for an hour, and it's hi Brad and hi Frank, and you jibber jabber, and people are nice enough to leave me alone so I can get enough contacts to make my CWT count, and there you go. It has turned out to be. From an evolution of me, myself, and I to being a group activity throughout the Milwaukee area. I mean, we're literally drawing people, throughout the area. It's great, and we use social media as our rally point, so to speak.
Well, I understand that you're also the public contact for the West Allis Radio Amateur Club. Do you use the club and maybe some collateral material to attract non-hams, or at least create some interest in the park?
We try very much to. We found that the 2 p.m. slot in the afternoon generally ensures us relative anonymity. Aside from, and I hate to be I hate to be stereotypical about it, but aside from soccer moms and whatnot, there's not usually much competition for the picnic tables.
Yeah, that may be true. So before we leave the park, can you talk a little bit about the club?
Yeah, the West Allis Club is the club I belong to, and there are several other clubs in the Milwaukee area. And it's very much a stereotypical type of ham radio club. We're currently having all the stereotypical challenges associated with what I'll say are ham radio clubs these days, and that our membership is graying out, and the membership is struggling for activities and that sort of thing. I don't think there's many ham radio clubs that don't have leadership challenges these days. It's been a challenging year, and we're seeing our clubs shrink, and it's just a challenge. I wish I had the answer for it. I don't. But between our club getting older, young members being somewhat scarce, we've cut back on a number of our standard activities. For instance, we had hosted the largest swap fest in Wisconsin, and that has COVID put a dagger in it, and I don't think it's going to return. So that's been we're physically unable to provide staffing for that level of an event moving forward. So it's somewhat heartbreaking.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. You were a part of a presentation in the last QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo, and it was called Soda in the Canadian Rockies, and you did this with Paul Maurer, VA6 MPM, who was a guest in a previous QSO Today podcast. Do you also do soda summits in the Canadian Rockies? How did you hook up with Paul?
Paul's an amazing amazing operator. And I hooked up with Paul. I sold him an antenna. I sold him a version of an antenna prior to the spark plug coming out. And since you've interviewed him, he has this wonderful, engaging personality and style, and he's an easy guy to get to know. And what he does in Soda World is just astounding. And he's so unassuming that you have to convince him that what he's doing is unique. But he certainly has the opportunity and the means, living where he does in the foothills of the Canadian Rockies, of Banff National Park, that he takes full advantage of it. So I sold him an antenna, and then I came up a year or so or two later with the spark plug, and I sent him one. I said, "Oh, I've got a new antenna for you. I want you to try it out." And being the affable fella that he is, he said, "Sure." And it just kind of went from there. I also he had some issues with batteries because Lord knows he's climbing a mountain, and he was using some really small batteries, and he's got this amplifier. And so I sent him a couple of my, which is no mean trick, by the way. Sending lithium batteries to Canada from the U.S. is not a task for the faint of heart, or the poor, for that matter. So I sent him some batteries, and he seems to be working with those, and they seem to work quite well for him. And he does these magnificent soda operations. I've had the good fortune of working him once, and I keep trying, but it just seems the propagation gods are against us. But we'll keep at it. But Paul did inspire me, and so to do soda work. And unfortunately, Wisconsin is not what would be construed as a soda paradise. So I do have an opportunity, however, in that the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is quite the wilderness, and sports what they call mountains up there, which compared to the Canadian Rockies are not. They're not even foothills by comparison, but they're very, very old mountain ranges that suffered 10 miles of glacier trotting over the tops of them. And so there's a series of mountain peaks up in the UP that are 1,500, 2,000 feet tall, that involve maybe 1,000 or 1,200 feet of vertical traverse. And the challenge up there is that most of them are on private ground. Most of the soda peaks are on private ground, and I have a great good fortune of one of my kids lives up in the UP, so we've got her as a base camp, so to speak. And so getting into the UP and getting into these mountains became my target of a year or so ago. And so we went up there about a year ago to scout the situation. And there are a number of peaks that are part of state parks, etc. And those you can get to. But the ones that I wanted to get to had never been activated, and those are all buried on private land. So although they don't have the vertical or mountain climbing technical challenges, the legal challenges to getting to them are far more insurmountable than if it was a sheer rock face. And just literally in the last few weeks, I had the great good fortune to gain access to a private mountain, to a mountain that was completely on private land. And we got up to the peak of Huron Mountain and activated it. And that was my very first soda activation. And it was exciting. I got to tell you, I despite all my park activities and literally years of doing park activities, I succumbed to the novice role to perfection. It was on my part. I'm doing a face palm, but what a cool thing to do. I'm looking forward. Thanksgiving. We hope to get back up there and do another peak in Thanksgiving in the UP, which, if you know the UP of Michigan, that could mean anything weather-wise.
You have an NXDN digital ID. What is NXDN?
No idea. The only reason I have that is I think when I signed on for Droidstar. I needed one of those in order to accomplish some sort of registration, but I don't use that mode.
Okay, and what is Droidstar?
Droidstar is a digital application that utilizes strictly computers and various AMBI implementations. Open source AMBI implementations to get you into things like the Brandmeister DMR network or the various other digital modes.
So are you on DMR?
I love DMR.
Really?
It is so atypical for me. I would actually buy a radio and not give a second thought whether it had a microphone or not. So how that computes with me loving DMR, I cannot explain it.
So why do you love DMR? Frankly, I have to tell you, I have DMR. I can't say that I'm anxious because the problem is everyone sounds the same on DMR to me. So I don't know who I'm talking to. So what do you like about DMR? Let me apologize to all the listeners who are DMR lovers who don't understand what I'm saying. But maybe it's just my age, and I'm so used to the hi-fi of analog FM that when I listen to DMR, I just don't know who I'm talking to.
Well, fortunately, the DMR or the digital modes solve that by providing a badge on your screen as to who you're talking to. But I don't understand the draw that I have with DMR. For me, it's a wonderful mode that I can wander around my house. I can wander and I can make contacts with a bunch of hams that I know. It's sort of just another extension, if you will, of back in the late 80s when I got my VHF radio and started to make contacts and friends in ham radio. It's the same thing, different mode. And now they're not bound by locality or zip code. Now, once you have an affinity for a talk group or a series of talk groups, you develop friends.
I get that now. So it's kind of like a ham radio intercom.
Yeah, very much so, and highly reliable. Oh my goodness, it's not propagation oriented. It's if they're on, it's digital. It's 1 or 0. Now,
do you use a hotspot?
I do. And I'm fortunate in the Milwaukee area. There's a very robust DMR repeater networks that exist. So as an option, I use the hotspot and love it. I don't find it. There's a net on the Reddit talk group on Brandmeister that's called the fake ham lid net. In deference to DMR not being, quote, real ham radio.
Okay, we'll have to look that one up on Reddit.
It's a fun net and a good group of people.
What excites you the most about what's happening in ham radio now?
What I'm excited about, and I know this sounds cliche, but I honestly believe that we're experiencing, if you will, this is the golden age of ham radio. I've never seen anything like this. Here's a hobby that I stumbled on. That's as we previously discussed. I'm as non-technical a ham as you're going to find any. I have an extra class license, so I'm here to tell you that's not a barrier. I happened to get my license back when you actually had to take a code test, and that wasn't a barrier for me at the time. It was for some, but that's gone. And the technology at your fingertips and what you do with it is astounding. For very little money, I can interface with a Chinese manufacturer and have email correspondence about a warranty claim on his very nice product. I can buy the number of kits that are available are unbelievable. The help is the help and assistance that's available, certainly via the leverage of the internet is second to none. Whether it's through various groups, and Groups.io is phenomenal. Facebook groups, Facebook's kind of getting a black eye these days, but for ham radio, it's de facto a great way to go. Blog posts, it's just there's no end to the influence that the internet has caused and changed ham radio. The various modes available by plugging your computer into the back of your radio is phenomenal. I'm fooling around today on my workbench, if you will, is a laptop that I salvaged for a couple $100 out of the junk bin that I've turned into my ham radio laptop. Runs Windows 10 quite competently, and I'm running around the house doing a remote operation with my 891. I mean, come on.
It's pretty amazing.
It is.
Because if you can run around the house doing it, then you can run around the country.
Right. I'm limited only by my travel budget.
Right, and your ability to configure a VPN or something like that.
It's phenomenal. If this isn't the golden age, I'm absolutely, it's stupidly funny, but we do strange things. So we'll go and we don't even know how amazing they are. But so I'm in the park last week and one of the guys constantly sets up an FT8 station, and so I was asking, well, what are you doing for a time sync? How are you time syncing it? And he goes, oh, that's easy. I just set my watch. I time sync it, on the internet before I leave for the park, and in the hour or two it doesn't get far enough off, and yada da da da. And when you think about it, so he comes out to this park, and personally, that's not how I would do it. I would use a little dongle that plugs into the USB port and syncs my time with a GPS system. How cool is that? But here we go. So he's hanging around on 17 meters, blasting away on FT8, and there's a dozen decodes with every 15-second window, and of those decodes, everybody's within 0.3 seconds of each other on an agreed time. How does that work? That is so cool.
It is pretty amazing. By the way, he could tether his laptop to his cell phone and get the time sync.
He chooses not to do that. I agree. That's plan B.
But maybe bringing a cesium time standard out to the park would be beyond the pale.
It would break my 5-minute setup rule.
Although maybe it would work for the guys with the big Go box, with a two-man carry.
Well, and when I did my soda operation, and here's a 64-year-old guy who's never climbed anything that's chasing my 30-something daughter up a mountain, and she's kind enough to put up with my I got to take a break routine. But I also I was kidding with Paul Maurer that I was asking him about tips on how to do the soda, and he said, well, that's easy. You're going with other people. I said, yeah, I've got a group of Sherpas and they've all agreed to split up the equipment. So I was going to go with my 891, but the bottom line was it ends up being 20 some pounds of gear. And so the day of the climb, they all look at me and go, we're not carrying any of that. so I when I got back, I asked Paul, what do you do when the Sherpas don't go on strike? And he said, well, it's easy, you just don't tip them.
Everyone will have heard that episode before they hear this one, but Paul was telling me, I remember camping up in the snow in Colorado and batteries don't work. I said, Paul, what do you do? He says, I wear the batteries. So to keep him warm, because he's working in minus 20, minus 30 degrees. If you talk to Paul and then and it comes Wednesday and it's raining outside, and I go, wow, Paul would go. He's a better man than I am. I was looking at the videos he does up there, and the thought of it, I was cold to my bones. No, I was going to say, I don't know how he does it, Eric. It's his environment. People, look, human beings, I think, are infinitely adaptable. I mean, they can live in South Carolina or they can live in northern Alaska, right? That shows adaptability of the human species. Well, and Paul is not, he's going to go, and he often goes by himself. I find that. That was a little mind-blowing. Yeah, that's a very difficult decision. What advice would you give to newer returning hams to the hobby? Join a club. The third evolution of my ham radio, which began about 5 or 6 years ago, began by joining a club. It underscored the social nature of this hobby. It if you will, it was the missing element of of evolution 1 and 2, and it brought everything together. And
I love the phrase tribal knowledge that becomes available to you via ham radio clubs and those associations is second to none.
I want to thank you so much for joining the QSO Today podcast and having this conversation with me. I really enjoyed it, and I knew that we would have enough to talk about.
Well, Eric, it has been special. I really appreciate you taking interest, and this has been a lot of fun. It's also helped me to distill my ham radio career. So that's very beneficial for me, and frankly, it's a great journey, and it continues.
73.
73, Eric. Thank you very much.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Mike. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in WO9B in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to Icom America for its support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of Icom America by clicking on their banner in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any other episode into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 400. QSO Today is now available in the iHeart Radio, Spotify, YouTube, and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use the Amazon Echo and say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." My thanks to Ben Bresky, who edits every single show and allows both this host and my guest to sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.